Well, it's great to be here. First time I've ever been in Boston. So then flying back to Oregon tomorrow, and then I'm flying back to D.C. from Oregon again on Monday. So I'm going to get like 6,000 frequent flyer miles. So this Colorado River situation is in flux. This is an this is a living document, the slide presentation. I actually changed it last night when I got in, just to demonstrate that it's the truth. This is a text message I got from one of my friends. Forest fire right outside Klamath Falls where I live yesterday, and she thought she was going to have to evacuate her property, and I got this last night, 6:15 Pacific time. So I made changes to this presentation since that time to reflect what's going on in the Colorado River Basin. So real quickly, Family Farm Alliance, as was mentioned, we're a nonprofit. We were set up about 25 years ago to advocate for ways to enhance and protect water supplies for irrigators in the 17 western states. Those are the Bureau of Reclamation states, coincidentally. I answer to a board of directors. They're all landowners, they're farmers and ranchers. I have an advisory committee of about 40, and these are water professionals. They're irrigation district managers, attorneys, economists from throughout the West, and they're just an amazing group of folks. I'm very fortunate to have them and be able to work with them. So we're going to talk about the Colorado River Basin today, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it. There's 7 basin states. This is a map prepared by the Bureau of Reclamation of the Watershed. It shows the boundaries of the Colorado River Basin and the states that it encompasses. A real critical part of the Colorado River Basin and that drives a lot of the policy is the degree of export that goes on. There's lots of out-of-basin transfers to places like Southern California, Imperial Irrigation District, Denver Water, Southern Nevada Water Authority. There's lots of uses, and right now those big users are driving some important policy directives that have concerns for my organization and others. And again, Colorado River issues it's tough. It's a touchy situation for me personally because we've got members in all 7 states, and in each state we have folks that view some of the things that are being done right now totally different. So my life's not been that comfortable here in the last year, and I'll give you a sense of what that's all about. Here about a year and a half ago, the Bureau of Reclamation released its Colorado River Basin study, and it was important because it looked at a variety of modeling runs that included things like climate change, future growth, and generally, as probably many of you know, a lot of these models, when they're run, they put in assumptions for future municipal growth. Sometimes they'll lock in environmental water needs. And then they'll look at climate change and how that's going to impact things. What gets spit out by these models oftentimes is, okay, here's the amount of water that we're short by, and then they convert that to here's the amount of irrigated acreage that would have to be fallowed to make up that difference. It seems like in the West, oftentimes, irrigated agriculture is seen as kind of the default reservoir to meet some of these other demands. So, and that's a concern for our folks because we're in it to protect their water rights, and we're always trying to emphasize the importance of the need to keep some of these folks in business so we can feed a world that has a growing population. So in a nutshell, here's a summary of what's going on, what came out of the Bureau study about a year and a half ago. It basically shows that for every one of these scenarios that was assessed, irrigated acreage is going to be lost. And of course that has implications for agriculture, but also rural communities that depend on agriculture. I live in Klamath Falls, Oregon. I used to run the Klamath Water Use Association in 2001. Because of environmental regulations, our 95-year supply of water was curtailed, and I saw what that did to our community. It has a huge impact on folks that provide fertilizer, implement dealers, restaurants. I mean, it has a huge impact on rural communities, so that's a concern. And the environment as well. And ultimately what I'm here to talk about is a coalition that was set up between conservation groups and ag groups who share those same concerns. Concerns for rural communities, but also concerns for the habitat provided by agriculture and the open spaces provided by agriculture in the West. So, as you look further into the future, in this study, I think it goes out to, I think, 2050, didn't it, Bonnie? And it shows basically shortfalls across the board for virtually every scenario that was assessed. 1 million acre-feet of water is targeted from ag by the year 2060 to fill the estimated gap that will exist between water supply and demand, primarily through temporary rotational fallowing and deficit irrigation practices. That's kind of what the Bureau is focusing on. From our standpoint, Family Farm Alliance, we've said, okay, that's got to be part of the mix, but there's lots of conservation already underway. We have to kind of supplement that suite of actions with supply enhancement as well, and infrastructure, which is a tough argument to make sometimes. The Basin study projects that irrigated acreage in the Colorado River Basin will decrease by between 300 and 900,000 acres by the year 2060. So one of the things my board of directors has charged me with is trying to help policymakers understand the implications of what happens when you take 6 to 15% of existing irrigated ag out of production in one basin. And it's of concern because this isn't happening just in the Colorado River Basin. California right now, there's 800,000 acres that are going to go without surface water in the Central Valley this year. At least half of those 800,000 acres are directly tied to implementation of the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act. So cumulatively, a lot of this stuff's going on, and people need to be taking a look at the big picture. Irrigated ag is a huge economic engine in the West. We just commissioned a study using an economist from up in eastern Washington last year, and actually we developed this to help provide the EPA with information on how important water is to our industry. When you look at impacts to households throughout the West, it's a $156 billion economy. This is a really important thing that a lot of us, I think, maybe take for granted. Irrigated agriculture, American agriculture in general, and our policies relative to food have put us in a position where we spend less of our disposable income on food than any other country in the world. So right now it's around 7%. It used to be up around 25% around World War II. And it's been our technology, it's been our policy, it's been our innovation that's allowed us to pay 7 to 8% of our disposable income on food. Can you imagine some of these countries right now, even in Europe, are paying close to 20%. That's, you know, if you're spending 20% of your income on food, that's things that you could be spending elsewhere. And economists will say the consumer spending element of our economy is the most important part of our economy. So our ability to have cheap food is a big part of our economy. So these are the types of arguments we're trying to make, in addition to the ones that we hear all the time from urban interests who say, hey, we need, you know, you can't put restrictions on growth because that's where our revenue's coming to support government programs or you know, improve society. Conservation groups have their arguments about the importance of water, but it seems like very rarely do we see the same sort of emphasis placed on, you know, opportunity costs and values associated with food production when we're making decisions about water resources. So again, that's something we are continuing to try to do, and I'm seeing, you know, definitely more of a consideration of this, particularly in Colorado, where they've had firsthand seen the impacts of buy and dry, where the government comes in or water agencies come in and essentially buy out a farmer's water right and transfer that for other uses. It has devastating impacts on rural communities. Another thing to consider is when you look at the Colorado River Basin, especially down in Arizona, that area, Imperial, during winter times, a lot of our fresh fruits and vegetables come from that area that help folks in other parts of the country. So again, our sort of mantra is we want to make sure that policymakers don't downplay or ignore the negative implications of reallocating more ag water supplies from the Colorado River or other western watersheds to meet new urban and environmental water demands. And that's, you know, again, I think there's sometimes, maybe it's because of the media coverage out west, but there's a misperception that ag is somehow continuing to grow. It's not. Our irrigated acreage is not expanding in the West. What's happening is the water pie, so the water supply pie is pretty much staying the same. It's being reallocated to meet growing municipal needs and environmental needs right now. The fishery agencies have implementation administration schemes right now that are taking water that used to go to irrigated ag, leaving it in the system for, I would say, the perceived benefit of fish, the listed fish. So there's also concerns from the conservation community on some of these types of programs. Colorado State University just did a report here a few years ago that shows that 92% of the wetlands in the upper basin areas were visually connected to the irrigation infrastructure. So return flows associated with ag use has a definite benefit for waterfowl. You see that also in the Sacramento Valley with the rice production that goes on there. And what's happened through land conversion and water diversions associated with ag, it plays a very important role for wetland habitat, especially in Colorado, where there's been a lot of wetland habitat lost to urban development on the Front Range. In the Southern Rockies, 43% of the private land that is located adjacent to public lands has a public grazing lease, and so there's a real benefit for conservation and open space associated with rangeland close to public lands. And how many here live like in the Western United States? Okay, so you all know. I mean, one thing that's different about where we live compared to out east, is the huge amount of publicly owned land. You know, where I live in Oregon, I think over 50% of the land is owned by the federal government. And so we have a huge federal nexus that has a huge impact on how resources are managed. Private lands, at least the conservation groups that I work with say have probably the best winter and riparian habitat for many wildlife species. Public lands have their own sorts of benefits, but I bring this issue up because the importance of protecting agriculture on private lands, the open space values, the wetland values, sometimes the fish values that good stewards can provide is something that we share. The conservation groups see the benefit of keeping farmers on the land. We do as well, maybe for different reasons, but it's these kind of common threads that brought some pretty diverse groups together, which I will talk about right now, which is the Western Ag and Conservation Coalition. That kind of shared philosophy of keeping private land in production, ag land and rural communities in production is kind of what brought us together. I had conversations with folks from the Nature Conservancy and Trout Unlimited here several years ago when we were talking about farm bill conservation programs, and they flat out told me they would much rather see a ranch or a farm out there using water than having it bought out for either purpose for water being transferred elsewhere or being used for development. I mean, condos do not provide great habitat for critters. Farm and ranch land can. So that's kind of the thinking that brought some of us together. This group that I'm talking about right now has its origins in the 2002 Farm Bill. I was working in the Klamath Basin at the time. We were approached by conservation groups and the Bush administration because we were expressing concerns about how EQIP money in the Farm Bill was being applied. We had $50 million in EQIP money that came into the Klamath Basin after the water got shut off. And NRCS came in, and unfortunately the federal agencies, NRCS, the Bureau of Reclamation, Interior Department, Ag Department, didn't really coordinate very well, especially with the irrigation districts who served water to the folks that were dealing with the EQIP money on their individual parcels. And so we saw a problem there. We felt like that money, if it had been applied on more of a regional basis, irrigation district basis or irrigation project basis, that you get more bang for the buck. You'd actually be able to see measurable results rather than 200 individual landowner projects scattered all over the basin, which we had a hard time seeing what kind of water quality and quantity benefits were developed or arising from all that. So that concept of coming up with a regional program, kind of an EQIP times 10, is the concept that we were advocating for. And it brought together some diverse groups: Trout Unlimited, National Water Resources Association, Family Farm Alliance, Association of California Water Agencies. Several of these groups got together, and ultimately we got this program called the Agricultural Watershed Enhancement Program dropped into the conservation title of the Farm Bill. And this coalition was a huge part of that happening. And the following Farm Bill that was passed included AWEP. This kind of shows the states that use AWEP types of projects. And AWEP, again, is more of a regional sort of a concept. It's intended to provide regional benefits to groups of folks beyond just individual producers on their land. And you know, it's an improvement. Unfortunately, for any of you who have been involved with you know, Congress, the stuff that comes out of the sausage making factory isn't what you put in sometimes. And that kind of happened with AWEP and some other programs. AWEP didn't really achieve what we were shooting to accomplish when we started negotiations. So as the farm bill, this latest farm bill started getting put together, we gathered together these groups that were working on the previous farm bill and really started focusing on the types of programs that we wanted to see. And we worked so well together that ultimately we formed an organization. We got bylaws and we've got a steering committee. And this is the group that works together. Right now we've been focusing mostly on farm bill issues, but we're starting to weigh in on Colorado River and other areas as well. And you'll see it's pretty diverse. There's irrigation interests like Family Farm Alliance, environmental defense. There's commodity groups like Wyoming Stock Growers. PLC is the Public Lands Council of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. TNC, Farm Bureau. It's really a great mix of folks, and we really get along well together. There's some things we won't touch, you know. We're not going to talk about whether we are on board with certain dam projects, for example. Endangered Species Act is another topic we kind of stay away from because we have differing views on that. But for the most part, when we focus on the need to do conservation programs, we're in agreement. One of the things we've developed, excuse me, in the last year are common water principles, which we're applying in several forms, including the Colorado River Basin right now, particularly the Colorado River Basin contingency planning efforts that are underway. Now, I won't go through in detail what these principles are, but if you're interested, I can get you the document. You just talk to me after this presentation, and it's very interesting to see what we've agreed on. These are groups in the past that we've gone to court and fought each other. We've battled each other in the press, and we've actually agreed on certain things like water right principles, just responsibilities of landowners and water users and municipalities. Water transfers, which is a real touchy topic out west. And infrastructure. We've actually reached agreement with Nature Conservancy and Environmental Defense that they believe that, yeah, new infrastructure is needed, including new dams, if they're sited in the right locations and they're done in a way that provides multiple benefits. So that's probably one of the most satisfying developments that I've dealt with in my career, but was seeing us reach agreement on that. And then we also weighed in on some policy matters. So I'm sorry I'm kind of blowing through this real fast, but I'm getting short on time. I want to talk specifically about what's going on with this contingency program. We're working on some other things in addition to the Reclamation's Basin plan. We got a grant from the Walton Foundation on doing case studies on where conservation works, where it doesn't in certain parts of the upper basin of Colorado. And the Colorado River Basin was recently designated a critical conservation area by NRCS and U.S. Department of Agriculture, so there's going to be more focus and money coming into that basin, which will have an impact on some of these conservation measures that I've been talking about. This is the big thing that's happening right now, kind of under the screen. Colorado River Basin Contingency Planning. It's being driven primarily by those large urban groups that I talked about. Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, Central Arizona Project, which provides water to the Phoenix area, Southern Nevada Water Authority, Las Vegas, and Denver Water. They and the Bureau of Interior, or the Secretary of Interior, have put together a pot of money intended to deal with lake level crises on Powell and Meade. Right now, those lake levels drive power production. Lake Mead, at one point, folks were worried that it was going to get so low that Las Vegas would not have, they would lose water, that they would get below its input, its intake. And so we're trying to find ways in the short term to deal with those lake levels. One of the things they're talking about is the urbans putting up money, coming up with some sort of a governing structure to get money out to folks in the basin to pay them for conservation efforts. All I can say is it's politically very touchy. It brings up all kinds of concerns from agriculture and environmental interests, but it's a pretty natural place for our coalition to get engaged. And so those principles that I just threw out there real quick, we're already trying to advance those and get the Department of Interior and the municipalities to reflect that sort of thinking. So they're not just looking at fallowing as they implement these measures. They pay farmers to tighten up the system, to do things that provide multiple benefits, to maybe find ways to produce water associated with production of petroleum and use that treated water on ag land and then maybe transfer the ag water for use elsewhere. Coming up with ways to shepherd that water through the system so that the downstream water user doesn't automatically use the water savings that the upstream neighbor does. All those things. So we got this coalition that's weighing in, and so far they've been pretty effective. We're getting, the folks are listening to us. So that you'll see more about that in the papers, I think, in the next 6 months or so. I think the urgency on some of this stuff has backed off a little bit because we got such good runoff this year in the Colorado River Basin. But they're concerned, policymakers are concerned about 2 more, if we have back-to-back dry years, it could be bad. It could be bad for power production on Lake Powell. It could be bad for Southern Nevada Water Authority. And people are trying to prevent basically a call on water rights on the river, and they're trying to work on things collaboratively. So we're hoping our coalition will have an impact there. And again, as we do all this, we're just really trying to educate policymakers on the importance of having strong domestic food production and those open spaces and environmental benefits associated with farming and ranching in the western United States. And again, I think this coalition has great potential to drive that message. That's a picture of several of the folks from the coalition on a kind of a field trip we took on a train last winter. And that is how I will close this out. And I'll be happy to talk about this afterwards. And if you're interested in those principles, let me know, because they're fleshed out in about a 3-page document. Thanks.